Growing up, my favorite section of my local library was the comic book and graphic novel area. My family moved every couple of years when I was young, but every new library had the comic book section, so there was always new stuff to find when we switched towns. But after one of our moves, I encountered something unusual amidst the other comic books, something I had never seen before, and which I absolutely hated. Ever since I saw my first manga, I have deeply disliked this art style, both in comic book form and especially when animated. The angular features, the strange exaggerated proportions, the jumpy pacing, and the bizarre internal monologues where characters warp into small versions of themselves have always weirded me out and just generally not been my thing when I'm looking for something to watch. That said, Kid Me did make a few exceptions. Like every 20-something, I watched and enjoyed Avatar: The Last Airbender when I was younger, which is obviously a show that is anime-inspired. I also watched several episodes of the French program Code Lyoko and the WB series The Batman, both of which share a lot of visual similarities to Japanese animation like Avatar does. As I've gotten older though, my preferences have gotten more entrenched, and up until recently, I really was not able to enjoy anime art or storytelling. Last summer though, I decided to change things up. Part of the reason was that I was really feeling like I was running low on Western programming. At this point, I felt like I'd already seen most popular sitcoms and fantasy shows that I wanted to see, and I was dangerously close to going all in on some boring police procedural. Instead of doing that, I decided to watch something very different. Armed with a 1-month subscription to Hulu, I decided I would swallow my dislike of anime as an art style and try to enjoy the creativity of many different stories before that 1-month subscription ran out, and see if I could turn my impression of anime around. I should add that this was far from a methodological endeavor. Essentially, I just watched sample sizes or pilot episodes of whatever show I wanted, and then if it really grabbed me, I kept watching until I didn't enjoy it anymore. By far my favorite anime that I watched during my month-long subscription was Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. I knew there was a lot of general internet hype for Fullmetal Alchemist going in, and that it was considered to be really good, and thankfully it did not disappoint. Initially it was difficult for me to get into Brotherhood because of my previously mentioned stylistic irritation, particularly with the warped faces during moments where characters are extremely irritated, and the odd hyper-real pacing surrounding these moments. But after I got used to that part of the storytelling, I was able to become really invested in Brotherhood, and I quickly started binging the entire series. I think part of the reason I was able to be invested in it so quickly was that it reminded me a lot of Avatar with the element-based magic systems, traveling the world seasonal arcs, and religious symbolism. In many ways, Fullmetal Alchemist feels like Avatar for adults since it touches on similar story beats such as moral responsibility and the horrors of war, but unlike Avatar, Brotherhood is more directly able to show the consequences of these kinds of topics in a way that Nickelodeon shows really weren't permitted to, since on Avatar you weren't allowed to directly show a character's death. Fullmetal Alchemist's lore, characterization, and fight choreography were all really entertaining. I think my only major complaint about the show was that I found the ending very drawn out. The show slows to a grinding halt once we get to the final battle, and events that supposedly take place over 24 hours take nearly a third of the 64-episode run of the show to tell, and that is just way too long. But the show is good and I enjoyed it. I'd definitely consider watching it again. While Fullmetal Alchemist really lived up to the hype for me, Akira was another story, and I did not end up finishing it. While most of the anime that I watched were TV series, Akira was the one movie that I tried watching, and the only anime that I was interested in watching for its visual style. I've heard for a long time about how good Akira is, and heard that its shots and stories impacted other media, so I went into this movie ready to like it, but I found myself really disliking the protagonist. This man is an ass, and none of the characters that were initially introduced were people I could get behind or enjoy watching. I think I made it maybe 20 to 30 minutes into Akira, but after that I just turned it off and decided to move on to something else. I would consider going back to Akira if someone I knew really wanted me to see it, but for now I'm leaving it alone. Spy Family was an anime I initially enjoyed a lot, but ultimately did not get very far in. Spy Family was a very fun and snappy spy adventure, and the storytelling didn't have as much of the goofy character warping stuff that bugged me in Fullmetal Alchemist. It was a really good watch, but the one thing I found very frustrating after the first couple episodes was that the psychic girl Anya didn't just tell her two foster parents, Yor and Lloyd, that she knows their secret identity. What was initially kind of cute became so frustrating to me that I had to Google at what point in the show everyone's identity would be revealed. And unless I misunderstood something, I'm guessing that information is just never revealed at all, so I decided to stop watching the show after the start of episode 3. If I'm just completely wrong about this show and it actually is revealed to Yor and Lloyd that each of them respectively has a double life, feel free to let me know. But personally, I found the dynamic of perpetual idiocy among the main characters too frustrating to deal with indefinitely. The characters were really fun though, and I would have liked to see more of them, just maybe in a slightly different context. One Punch Man was recommended to me as a satire of superheroes, but it was more of a satire of anime specifically from what I gather. I didn't really enjoy it much at all, and I found it pretty boring, although the concept of a superhero who's so good at being a superhero that he grows disinterested in being one is actually a pretty compelling idea, so I think the problem was just execution. Maybe if I had watched more anime before watching One Punch Man, I would have enjoyed the show more, but as it was, I found the oppressive environment of the endless city coupled with the monotonous boredom of Saitama just bland to watch. Maybe if Saitama had had a sidekick who could have been a really exuberant foil to counteract Saitama's boredom, it would have been more fun to me. However, the show as it was didn't hook me, but I'm not ruling it out completely since I could see giving it another go. I only watched the pilot episode and a few minutes of the second episode, so I definitely did not get very far. My Hero Academia is an anime I didn't know much about besides the fact that it was about a school for superheroes. It's one of my younger brother's favorite anime shows, and he said he likes it because Midoriya solves most of his problems by thinking his way out of them, and it's definitely a noteworthy element of the show. My Hero Academia is a show that seems to heavily focus on Midoriya's strength of character coupled with his ability to be strategic in how he fights, and it definitely makes him an interesting protagonist to follow, if a bit annoying at times when he internally tells the audience for the 20th time his entire backstory every time he gets in a fight. The show has a creative array of side characters with fun powers, and I enjoyed watching them grow and do challenges as an ensemble. That said, My Hero Academia does get a little more into the anime weirdness that I am peripherally aware of, by which I mean its frequent over-sexualization of teens. I'm just kind of assuming that My Hero Academia is intended primarily for kids or young adults based on its tone, but whether it is or not, it's very weird how willing the show is to dwell on facts like, for example, the invisible girl taking off all of her clothes, or how frequently it highlights or mentions female students' breasts. You definitely don't see that in Western cartoons, at least not ones aimed at young adults or kids, so it was more than a little weird. However, the show does have a lot of good elements that balance out the ones I didn't like. I didn't get nearly as far in My Hero Academia as I did with Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, but I made it through most of Season 1, getting up to Episode 11. Despite my reservations, the plot was interesting enough that I would probably watch more if I ever had access to the show again through a streaming service. It was pretty entertaining. The show that I knew even less about than My Hero Academia before trying it was Bleach, and I picked it just from seeing it randomly while scrolling through Hulu. It was probably the show I felt the most middle of the road about between all the anime that I tried because it was so average and Saturday morning cartoon feeling in just kind of a generic way. That said, it is possible my standards were too high after seeing several other anime by this point. I think Bleach was the last one that I started after all the shows I watched. It definitely wasn't a terrible program though, and I am curious where it went next. Like One Punch Man, I only got to the start of episode 2, but I would consider watching more. To be honest, I would have preferred the show be about Ichigo solving the problems of ghosts without involving the big monster fighting stuff at all. A little more subtlety with the storytelling would have been fun. Aside from Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, Death Note was the anime I enjoyed the most. In part, I enjoyed Death Note because it didn't really feel like an anime with regard to the tropes of the art style, but instead just felt like a supernatural thriller that happened to be animated. But like many of the anime I watched, it had a unique flavor to its fantasy and world building because of the different cultural context that comes from being from Japan instead of somewhere in the West. I loved watching Light discover the rules of the Death Note and the cat and mouse game between him and L. The addition of the character of Ryuk for Light to confide in is also really fun and gave the audience a unique perspective on a unique serial killer. I watched 7 episodes of the show, and I would probably watch more if given the opportunity, but by the time I got that far, my subscription had expired. So having watched this smorgasbord of anime, where does that leave me? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to bring you the blistering hot take that anime is good. I definitely don't think I can classify myself as an anime hater anymore because I have watched and enjoyed a lot of anime, but that said, I'm still not really a fan of the art style. What I am a fan of is getting to enjoy a different set of ideas and cultural elements that shuffle around superheroes and fantasy settings, and I will probably look for opportunities to watch other anime in the future. If you have recommendations of new anime you think I'd like based on the ones I've watched so far, let me know. Thanks for indulging my self-important rambling, and thanks for watching.